In a recent video that I made on an interview that Dr. Dewi Evans gave in 2023 to BBC Radio Cymru, Evans made a statement that we're going to assess in this video. The comment was that I think one important thing was this: when I got the reports, I didn't know the name Lucy Letby or anything. So there are a few things to note about this. The first thing is that the interviewer didn't actually ask him about this, he just volunteered this information. This is not the first time that Dr. Evans has done this during an interview. In fact, he's done it several times. So I would immediately ask the question of whether this is indicative of a guilty conscience. Is this Dr. Evans getting his defence in over allegations that he actually knows to be true? So when Dr. Evans was speaking with John Sweeney in his excellent podcast series, the following exchange occurred. Sweeney: when did you first hear the suspicions about Lucy Letby? Evans: when she was arrested for the first time in July 2018. This is after I prepared 33 of my 34 initial reports. So let's remember that term, initial. I just looked at the evidence, which was limited to what was in the case notes. So her name, was that in the case notes? Then Evans says, not in all of them, no, but in a good number. Not really, her name didn't stand out compared to the names of other nurses. And the reason for that is I spent most of my time looking at the medical notes, which were kept separate to the nursing notes. So in relation to that, let's consider a few things with regard to that statement. Firstly, Evans claims that he never heard the name Lucy Letby until July 2018. We can hold that date in our minds as the video continues, but let's consider the following first. Evans is pretty certain about this date and how significant it was that he heard the name Lucy Letby, considering that in other areas his memory isn't quite so prolific and infallible as we'll see later in the video. This seems a pretty unlikely recall. The naming of Lucy Letby shouldn't have been particularly significant to him. It seems far more likely that this is some story that he's concocted so that he can rely on it when he's asked about it. Although in the Welsh interview he wasn't even asked about it, and he has volunteered this information on previous occasions without being asked about it. But he certainly seems very clear to emphasise that he didn't know the name Lucy Letby. The next thing is that Sweeney asked him about Lucy's name, and after stating that he never encountered her name, Evans then gives specific information regarding how much her name was in the case notes. He then even expands on this further still. He firstly indicates that Lucy's name was not in all of them, no, but in a good number. Now, he might have got away with claiming that he only noticed this after July 2018, but he's then stupid enough to expand on this. So he then says, not really, her name didn't stand out compared to the names of other nurses, and the reason for that is I spent most of my time looking at the medical notes, which were kept separate to the nursing notes. So what Evans has indicated here is he did encounter Lucy's name before 2018, despite claiming otherwise. He is explicitly aware of the instance that Lucy's name appeared in these notes, and this doesn't matter because he claims to have ignored it. Whereas his initial claim was that he hadn't encountered the name of Lucy Letby until July 2018. So there are a few further things that we can conclude from this as well. The first thing is that it seems very strange that Dr. Evans would remember how many times the name Lucy Letby was in the nursing notes. Indeed, this isn't something that he should be aware of at all at any stage, because he has indicated that he kept the nursing notes and the medical notes separate. Now, that feeds into the statistical claims about this case, because he states, I just purely looked at the medical information dispassionately and didn't take into consideration any coincidences related to names that may or may not have been on the notes. But now he indicates that he actually had these names all over the notes, and not only that, but he gives explicit statements regarding how often Lucy's name appeared in the notes, even though he shouldn't even have noticed this. Initially, of course, he claimed, I never even heard the name Lucy Letby until July 2018. Now he's stating, well, yeah, her name was in the notes, but it really wasn't there any more than anyone else, and I didn't particularly pay any attention to it. Now, this is not something that he should know. It's not something that he should necessarily be aware of. And it's strange that he would say this, given that he initially claimed that I never encountered the name Lucy Letby until she was arrested. So now we're going to look at a meeting that we've examined before and that we'll probably examine again. And this was between largely Dr. Ravi Jayaram, Dr. Stephen Brearey, Paul Hughes and Nigel Wenham. Dr. Susie Holt, I think from one of the Liverpool hospitals, was also in attendance, but she said virtually nothing at this meeting. In fact, I can't see any evidence that she said anything. I don't really even understand why she was there. It's mainly Brearey and Jayaram speaking and Hughes and Wenham taking notes. So we're just going to look at the incidences of nurse in this document. So here, Ravi Jayaram, if you have concerns about a doctor, you would report to the GMC, concerns about a nurse to nurse and midwifery council. If wider issue like this escalate through the trust. Anyway, this is immediately indicating they have concerns about a nurse. And you'll see how clear they make this during this interview. So then it goes on. Stephen Brearey, following on from that thematic review. Following on from that thematic, we discussed the nurse, Lucy, but no action taken. So throughout this document, it's kind of indicated that they didn't name Lucy Letby explicitly. There's one instance that contradicts that. I suspect that's a mistype or misprint. Most of these Thirlwall documents are shoddy, and this was produced by Cheshire Police, so they probably just cocked up. I don't think Brearey and Jayaram did name Lucy, but as we'll see, they made it so clear who they were referring to, Lucy would have been easily identifiable by the end of this conversation. So then they say, I shared the report. At this time, the nurse had been put on day shifts for mentoring reasons. So almost immediately, you'd be able to identify Lucy from that quite easily as a police constabulary. Confirm how many that nurse had been present. The nurse was present in all but one of the deaths. So the other thing to note from this is the extent to which they're pushing this statistical coincidence that I certainly believe to be central to the case. Obviously, they presented the shift chart in court, and I believe that's an absolutely key item of the prosecution case. So they go on, this is Ravi Jayaram now. At the point of the collapse, the nurse was present at that time in close proximity. This has not happened to other staff. And this is the entire foundation of this case. So I'll move on. I can speak about one that did collapse but survived 27 weeks, was stable, had breathing tube down, good ventilation, named nurse, i.e. nurse assigned to care for baby, had gone out of nursery, I went back in, the baby's oxygen level had dropped. So this is child K. He's talking about the breathing tube had been dislodged. So it says here, he says eventually the nurse was present at the time. So this is child K, and this is the first time that Jayaram has mentioned this. So I think it's over 400 days. I believe the precise number is 438 days since this occurred. And he's been through multiple processes, and this is the first time he's actually remembered that Lucy supposedly tried to extubate this infant deliberately, which is obviously total rubbish. But it slipped his mind for over a year, and then he just walks into the police station and happens to remember. This is like one day after. Well, that's a slight exaggeration. This is 11 days after he said, "Oh, we need to pique the interest of the police." So continue with this document. It got to the point that when nurse was on duty, we feared something would happen. We are not on a witch hunt. We have concerns that this nurse was present in far too many occasions. Designated nurse. Staffing was included in that report. Staffing on shift, designated nurse, consultant on duty. That's not a reference to Lucy. The nurse was present at all three. That was the first conversation. That's another reference to Lucy. So that's just a general reference to nurses. So that's not a reference to Lucy. There's no explanation. She was the named nurse, blah, blah, blah. Other nurses have gone off. Oh, here's one. Other nurses have gone off work with stress. She didn't. So they used that in the court case. That was just an argument, just some random argument thrown in by Dr. Stephen Brearey here that means absolutely nothing, and they used that in the court case. Duty exec was happy for nurse to remain on duty at that time. And then finally, at a meeting in January, the executive read out a letter from the nurse that states she was exonerated by reviews to date, which is true. So you can see from this meeting that they made it so clear that firstly they suspected a nurse. That would be enough in itself, but they made it absolutely crystal clear that it's Lucy that they suspected, and Lucy could be easily identified from the information that they provided. So there are quite a few conclusions that we can draw from this meeting. The first thing is that Brearey and Jayaram couldn't have made it any clearer that they suspected a nurse. That was the entire crux of the conversation. They gave easily enough detail to make Lucy Letby clearly identifiable. There is a possibility that they named Lucy Letby, although this could have been a misprint typing error, although frankly they might have named her, as they basically did anyway. From this point onwards, the police investigation rapidly focused on Lucy at the exclusion of everything else. We know that comments made at this meeting were used in court, such as the assertion that Lucy didn't require a break, whereas other nurses did. This was an explicit argument of the prosecution. In my view, it's unthinkable that Dr. Evans would not have been informed by the police that there was a nurse suspect, or that he would never have picked this up. He must have gleaned this information during the first year of working with them. I want to return to point 4. If you watch the promotional film that I'm going to mention again in part 7 of this little the 7th point, that film that was made by the Cheshire Constabulary indicated that they determined that Lucy Letby was guilty very quickly, and then they completely focused on her. Indeed, Michelle Warden, who was in the previous video that I recorded, she contacted the police in 2017 before Lucy Letby was arrested and said, have you looked at the Royal College of Paediatrics review? Have you looked at various other items of information and tried to provide the police with some important information? Now, Michelle told me that they just completely ignored her, and all they wanted her to do was give them dirt on Lucy, say, do you know Lucy? Have you got anything, any incriminating evidence regarding Lucy, etc., etc.? So they'd already made their mind up well before they arrested Lucy. So it seems possible to me, for point 7, that Lucy was identified well before she was arrested. In fact, that's likely. In fact, all of the evidence points to this. Certainly the Operation Hummingbird promotional film strongly suggests this. So if we move on from that, I just want people to also remember a police meeting that took place on the 5th of May. This is the initial meeting of the Cheshire Constabulary to launch Operation Hummingbird. Now they've just had the Council of Chester Hospital refer the case to them, and they conclude here that there's no evidence that's been referred to them other than coincidence. So all they were looking at this point was this statistical coincidence that Brearey and Jayaram have mentioned in the meeting. So the next thing I want you to note is that Dr. Evans mentioned this date of July 2018 when they arrested Lucy Letby. That's the first time I ever heard her name. So even if we accept that for the sake of argument, he produced multiple reports. So as noted here in Private Eye, Dr. Evans produced 8 pre-trial reports. So there's no way that he wrote those 8 reports by July 2018 and then did absolutely nothing for 4 years. And that's why he himself said in his statement, I asked you to remember the term initial. My initial reports were produced before I knew the name Lucy Letby. Now, I'm not convinced that's true, but even if we accepted that for the sake of argument, he definitely produced reports after he knew the name of Lucy Letby. There's absolutely no doubt of that. In fact, most of his work on this case was done after July 2018, when he definitely knew the name of Lucy Letby. That's the majority of his work. The next thing I want to point out is that Dr. Evans changed his opinion on child seat in particular during the court case. There was an extraordinary exchange between himself and Ben Myers that's on the screen now, if you can see the screen. So he definitely knew the name Lucy Letby then, because Lucy Letby's staring back at him from the witness box, and yet he's still changing things around, and yet whatever he does to change things around, he always concludes that Lucy Letby is guilty. He also shifted incidents and collapses around during the court case. The next thing is, as we know, Dr. Evans wrote to Channel 5 after the court case and changed several of his diagnoses from the court case. Indeed, he can't actually give an interview to anyone now because on the one hand he's praised the Court of Appeal, and then on the other hand he's written this letter and this is in the public domain, and those two things completely contradict each other. But we've seen examples of Dr. Evans' honesty or otherwise previously, because when he was interviewed by the Sunday Times, he made this claim about the Lee and Tanswell paper that the paper had got a lot of publicity, but it was not a major factor in the prosecution case. I should also mention that the comments and statements that he made immediately after this in the Sunday Times article were utter drivel. However, I won't dwell on those in this particular video. So in the Court of Appeal document, it is noted that the Lee and Tanswell paper featured prominently in the trial, and indeed the Court of Appeal verdict is virtually entirely dedicated to discussing the Lee and Tanswell paper. This is another extract from the Court of Appeal where they quote Dr. Evans himself explaining in the court case that the Lee and Tanswell paper was the best known in relation to pulmonary vascular air embolism in the newborn. We also see him in the court case with Ben Myers cross-examining him, and Ben Myers says, "You base what you've asserted upon what you've read, the description in the report by Lee and Tanswell, don't you?" The response of Dr. Evans was as straightforward as is possible. He simply said, "Yes." But despite that, he has attempted to, once Dr. Lee came out and criticised him and criticised his work, and rightly so, Dr. Evans tries to backpedal and say, "Oh, well, the paper never even mattered," even though he has previously said otherwise. That's a very good example of how honest he is and how highly he values the truth. He doesn't value the truth at all. What he values is his reputation, his ego, and being right. And we've seen that throughout everything that he said publicly, and we're seeing it again in relation to this issue of whether or not he knew Lucy Letby's name. The reality is that Dr. Evans is, and this is putting it in the most generous way possible, a deeply compromised person. This is yet another dubious and embarrassing episode which further undermines his credibility. There is no doubt that Dr. Evans knew Lucy Letby's name for the majority of the time that he was compiling reports for the police, and we know that he changed those reports countless times, even completely changing the method of collapse and death. It is also likely, in my opinion, that he knew that there was a nurse suspect, and it's even very possible, based on the evidence that I presented in this video, that Dr. Evans knew Lucy Letby's name from day one.